What's up, everyone, and welcome to our Section 1C and D and the Hudson Valley Football League team previews, where we'll be talking about all the different teams in the section and the Hudson Valley Football League, giving a brief overview and talking about some of the players that you should definitely be keeping an eye on. I'm your host, Frank Langella. I'm joined by my co-host, Marcelio Langella. Mars, we are a couple days away from the start of playing football games, and football season has really been underway and about to really kick off.
Yeah, I mean, the year flew by and we're finally back at it. The summer always, once we hit the August, it's gone at that point. It's football season. So we're back at it again. Another season, some new changes, some new looks, and I'm just excited to be back at it.
Absolutely. And again, before we dive into the different teams, just want to kind of give that quick, plug that if you haven't done so yet, make sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to help support the channel on YouTube. We're dropping a lot of our content right here. You can also catch our live shows as well. And think about joining our Patreon. It really does help the group. You get some added benefits and coverage from there. And we appreciate our members as always. With that said, let's talk about the leagues. And we're going to talk about C and D and then jump into the Hudson Valley Football League like I talked about at the start. And Westlake and Bronxville, they've moved on. So the teams that competed for the 1C championship have both moved up to B, but Putnam Valley and Hastings has moved down to C. Nothing's changed on the D end, and then we'll dive into the Hudson Valley Football League. But, when we talk about C and D, the Section 1 had a media day that they've done for a couple of years, and they put out a poll, which, again, talks about which team they think is going to be the best, I guess, out of C and D, because they do play each other, but there is a C champion and a D champion. If you're unfamiliar with that. So they put up the coaches and players poll on who they think the top teams are, and a really interesting one, right? So you can see it on the screen. Very different, right, from the two polls. So, interesting little information there, and that kind of shows that they probably people don't feel that there's a clear favorite. But let's dive into the C teams first. And this is going to be no particular order. Well, I guess alphabetical order, so there's no particular on how we feel about them. But the first team I want to talk about is Dobbs Ferry. And this is a staple in C, Mars. You know this as well as I do. They went 5-3 last year, lost to Bronxville in the semifinals, coached by Coach Cox. And they are 24-6 the last 3 years. They have not been under 500 since before 2004. So this is obviously a team that knows how to win in this league. And offensively, they're returning 4 starters, 2 on the offensive line, and returning their quarterback in Kevin Hartnett, who's going to be so important for them. Multiple-year starter for them, big-time runner in that wing T option offense, and has improved as the play-action quarterback now. Has to limit the turnovers and mistakes. So I'm interested to see the next step forward that he makes, but he's going to be so important for this team if they want to compete for a title. Defensively, this was the number 1 defense in C and D last year. They're returning 5 starters. So, again, Dobbs Ferry is well known for their defense and their ability to run the ball, and that's got to continue this year. I mentioned players to watch. Kevin Hartnett is obviously one of them, but Michael Rodriguez, Mark Guerrero on that offensive line and the defensive line is going to be extremely, extremely important. Nestic Smith, though, at the halfback spot, and Jackson Kearns. Those are the guys going to have to fill those running back roles for Dobbs Ferry. But to me, everything revolves around that quarterback and Kevin Hartnett. Next, let's talk about Hastings. Again, moving down to C, coached by Coach O'Hare. They were 2-6 last year. They did not make the playoffs. Offensively, I didn't get to talk to Coach, but offensively they were 14th out of the 17 teams in B. They did hit some big plays offensively, but the consistency just I don't think was there enough. And so that's going to be a big emphasis, I would imagine, this year, is being a little bit more consistent, being more productive on first and second down. Defensively was also a struggle. They gave up a lot of big plays. They were 15th out of 17 teams in points allowed in B. So coming down to the smaller league may be beneficial to them, but there's just way too many big plays. Now, a player to watch out for, Andrew Tentoff, the senior wide receiver. He stood out on tape. He's one of the big players to watch that I know Lohud covered. He's going to be really important on making some of these big plays for their offense. Mars, comments?
I feel like Dobbs Ferry is kind of granted, I don't think they're shy for competition, but they are most breathing a sigh of relief seeing that both the top 2 teams in C are going back up to B.
Yes.
While whenever Bronxville and Westlake are not in C, Dobbs Ferry is the king of C. So They must feel like, all right, now we got to show again that we are the top contender and they were always competitive. Their defense has always been good, and now they run that offensive schemes that can slow the game down and kind of follow the slow the game down and just ride with their momentum. So Das Ferry has some proving to do this year, and I feel like they have the skill players that can do that. So it's gonna be a question of the offensive line, but Das Ferry, I guess the expectations are very high again.
Yeah. Let's talk about the next team, which I think is actually the favorite, and that's Putnam Valley. Again, coached by Coach Ryan Alacier. He's been coaching there since 2016, I believe. And he went 5-3. They lost to Pleasantville in the quarterfinals. And 5 wins is the most wins they've had since 2016, which they also had 6 wins. So again, strong year that they had last year. Offensively, they were 7th in the league in points scored. They're returning 5 of 11 starters, 3 on the offensive line, which I think is going to be a huge emphasis because Das Ferry is really strong up front. And so Putnam Valley is bringing around some veteran offensive linemen. Now, their quarterback in Dobra, who's a stud linebacker for them, went through some real growing pains at the quarterback spot. He's coming at he's playing at the quarterback spot this year, and they have to replace one of their most dynamic players. They relied very heavily on Ricky Meister, the running back. So that's going to be a big emphasis. Who's that next workhorse for Put Valley offensively? But how about this, Mars? Defensively, this team was number 2 in points allowed in B last year, and they're returning 7 starters on defense. This could be a very strong defense, in my opinion. So, but they do have to replace Jashaj, which was a really good defensive lineman and offensive lineman. So, a couple guys to watch: Caden Glenn. Remember this kid, really important player. He's a tight end and outside linebacker. He had, I think, 8 sacks last year defensively, really coming off the edge. He could really be an anchor against sweeps, outside runs. And on offense, he was really strong after the catch. He's strong, he's powerful, could be a real big target. You put him in the backfield, run the ball. This is going to be a really important player for them. So keep an eye on that. Mateo Dobra at the linebacker spot also was really impressed with him at the linebacker. He's really good at avoiding blockers to the ball, to the hole, which I find to be very important. And a couple other guys, Andre Tarrant, Nick Mazzola, Jay Constantino. Coach was really impressed with their work in this offseason. And then Michael Turner and Dylan Tucker up on that offensive line. Those are going to be, again, key. If they're going to make a run, it's going to be because they're really strong in the trenches compared to the teams around them. Next thing I want to talk about, probably one of the sleepers, is Valhalla, coached by Dan DiMatteo in his first season. They were 3-5 last year, lost to Westlake in the semis. Offensively, they're returning 5 starters, 1 offensive lineman. So that's going to be obviously one of the biggest holes that they have, is figuring that out. Also, quarterback-wise, they have Braden McGinty and Josh Berge, who was a halfback last year competing for the job. So they're figuring it out. They ran the triple option, last year. It really depends on what happens at the quarterback spot, I think, which is going to change the identity of that offense. Defensively, they're returning 4 starters. So they lost a lot from last year. You're going to see quarterback is a big question mark. Numbers is a big question mark. Experience. But a couple guys to keep an eye. Josh Berge, I mentioned at the quarterback. He was really strong as a defensive back and running back for them last year. Athletic kid. So, he's going to be there. Tyler Ratty is another one. Probably their most dynamic player on offense at the halfback spot. He can get to that second level and create big chunk plays. And Luke Foysette, he was a freshman last year at the linebacker spot. And Coach raved about him. And when you watch tape, he really stood out. He could be a guy who really explodes. Mars, questions. Also, Danny Lynch. I don't want to mention on that offensive line. I apologize. Go ahead, Mars.
Yeah, I think Putt Valley has really a good shot to make a lot of noise this year, mainly because of the fact that they have a lot of returning players. They show a lot of promise on defense, and the fact that they have size. And I feel like that's what Putt Valley has been really thriving on the last year. That they had a big team, they had a great running back, they had a lot of line that can move people around. And now the hope is that they can bring that back again. And as I mentioned with Das Ferry, the same thing I can say with Putt Valley, with Bronxville and Westlake now moving back up, it's all right. The C becomes now more wide open, and Putt Valley, dropping down. It's like, hey, we're the bigger team in C now, and now we need to kind of show that we should be in that section title discussion. So Putt Valley has a chance. It's just about the offensive line really setting the stage for them. Yeah.
Let's talk about the final team in C, Mars Woodlands. Coached by Coach Bascom. They went 0-7 last year. They didn't make the playoffs. Offensively, they're bringing back 4 of 11 starters, none on the offensive line. So the offensive line is going to be completely revamped this year. Good news is they're returning their quarterback, Masai Campbell, who I'm impressed. He's tall, he's long, and there are some real impressive plays of throwing with anticipation, throwing with some good touch outside the numbers. He's going to be so important for them to try to make plays. But the big focus to me, one coach, is improving the rush attack. So they have the quarterback. They need to run the ball better, and it definitely starts up front. Defensively, they are returning 5 of 11 starters coming back, but they have to be better against the pass. They gave up way too many big pass plays last season. Couple seniors, though, to watch on this team, though. I mentioned Masai Campbell, who's going to be really important. Jamison Stevens, up on the defensive line. He's a defensive tackle. You can move him a little bit of defensive end. Also a tight end. This is a guy who's a big man. He's like 6'4", 260. And, he's pretty nimble for his size. So he's a guy who can anchor down. He can cause some penetration. And he made some plays in the passing game last year. So definitely keep an eye on him. He was a Frank's finest on the D-line. Ethan Locke is another one. Kind of this smaller linebacker, outside linebacker, who is tough as nails, tackled well in space, can really hit you. And at the running back spot, he's going to play a key role if they're going to try to improve the rush attack. And then Skylar Tureen is another one as a wide receiver and corner. Let's move to D now, Mars. And the next, obviously, the two teams in D who play each other at the end of each year, who have both been pretty darn successful playing the C teams. I mean, you have to be impressed. The first one's got to be Haldane, coached by Coach McConville. They went 8-3. They won versus Tucko in the section title game for 1D. 20-10 the last 3 years. Haldane has been pretty damn impressive the last couple of seasons. And offensively, they have to replace a lot of guys. Especially some of the, big-time players in Gianchinta, their running back, and Van Tassel, their quarterback. So they're returning 3 starters offensively, 1 on the offensive line. So a lot that is going to have to be figured out at the quarterback spot. David Palace is a rising sophomore for them that coach has been very impressed with. Defensively, though, they do bring a little bit more veteran players, and 4 out of 11 starters coming back. Secondary is going to be their strength. Without question, it's the front 7 that is really going to have to figure things out for them. I mean, when you look at this team, Mars, Falau Faye, 6'3" defensive corner who does press man. Brody Corliss, one of my favorite players to watch at the safety spot, made a lot of big time plays for them. Also is going to be huge as a running back. Jake Thomas, another defensive back, but he also made some big plays as the season went along in the section title game at the wide receiver spot. And then there's a couple other guys. You got Nate Stickle, Eric Williams, Alex Guagler, David Powell, as I mentioned, at the quarterback spot, and even Cooper Corliss. So, there's going to be a lot of questions, but opportunity for these guys. Nate Stickle is going to be one on the offensive line, though, to me, as they replace all these guys going to have to anchor down. So, Tucko is the other D team. Obviously, those that are familiar, coached by John DiArco. They went 4-4. They lost a thrilling game against Haldane in the section title. They are returning 5 of their offensive starters, 4 on the O-line. So keep that in mind. This is a veteran O-line coming back, but they do have to replace a lot of skill guys at the wide receiver spot, and they're tremendously talented quarterback. Now, Connor Bryce, who is one of those starting receivers, is moving to the quarterback. He was a big player for them on both sides of the ball. He's a dual threat quarterback as well, probably more focused on running than throwing, but again, a very talented athlete. Defensively, 5 of 11 starters coming. So coming back. So obviously solidifying the skill position quarterback is going to be key for them. And a couple players to watch. Thaddeus Serlo, Mars. Keep an eye on him. He was hurt all of last year. He got hurt in the second game of the season. He is supremely talented defensive lineman, and probably moving to that offensive line as well. But defensive line, he was super disruptive. And he had high expectations going into last year. Unfortunately got hurt. Look for him to have a bounce back big time season. Matt Gardier at the linebacker spot and offensive lineman. He's a super active linebacker. Watch the section title game versus Haldane. You'll see how active he is. If you don't want to watch a full season of tape, like the craziness of me and Mars, just watch that section title game where he makes a lot of plays. And Connor Bryce, the guy, he's a very good athlete moving to the quarterback spot. Go ahead, Mars.
I feel like
I love talking too much.
No, I feel like just the Class D is a very interesting situation, obviously, because both teams have been battling for forever. But the idea is that obviously Haldane has so many guys they have to replace on the offensive defensive side, while you look at then Tuckahoe, who has quite a bit of returning guys, specifically in the offensive line, right? And I always kind of say, I'm a big believer in the Hogs and what they do for these offenses. And I feel like that is something that I'm looking at for both these perspectives, because they have athletes, they have guys that can make big plays. So it's going to be all about the offensive line play and really the ability to open up these lanes, because like you said, for Haldane, they're losing a lot of skill players, right? And now the question is going to be, do you have that star power that then sends you to that to bring you back, right? And to even improve on, you know, their really successful season last year.
Yeah. Now let's move to the Hudson Valley Football League, Mars, and there's 7 teams in the Hudson Valley Football League. We cover them as well. So we got to give love to that league as well. It's been another competitive league. So let's talk about them. And let's start with Albertus Magnus, coached by Luke Ladini in his first season. They were in the independent league last year, moving into the Hudson Valley Football League. So it was good to see them come back. They were 2-6 last year. Offensively, they're returning 6 of their starters, 3 on the offensive line, and they're returning their quarterback in Vincent Pistielli. So again, bringing back some veteran players here. Defensively, 6 of 11 starters also coming back. So, you know, the big question mark to me is on that offensive line. They are returning a couple veteran guys, but they have to be better offensively, up front, for them to continue to be successful. A couple guys to watch that coach liked, and even some of the things that I've seen, is Tyler Wine, Sean McGinnis, who's a wide receiver and defensive back, Heath Miller, who's also a wide receiver and defensive back. You have Marcelo Arellano, offensive lineman and defensive lineman. Matt Nevin, who's also he's a linebacker and tight end. So there's a couple different players who really stood out that coach wanted to mention of the hard work that they've done. So that is Albertus Magnus. I do like some of these veteran players coming back. They can make some noise in this league, coming from the independent league. Next up is Horace Greeley. And, you know, they're coming from coached by Coach Dylan Clark in his first season, also a graduate of Greeley. So nice little story there. And last year was a struggle with returning to Section 1. They went 2-8. They didn't make the playoffs. Offensively, you know, they've returned 5 starters. Now, the big question to me is on the offensive line. 1 out of 5 coming back. They do return their star quarterback in Julian Osh, who suffered a brutal injury last season that cut his season short. He was, you know, in 5 games, he still had 9 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards. So he was on pace to have a pretty strong year. Did have some turnovers, though, that were things that he needs to correct. But this is a quarterback that really showed his improvement on driving the ball down the field and on some intermediate throws with some really good timing. We know that he can run the ball, but this is a young man who can really be dynamic. And Coach talked about what changes. I asked him on the offense. They do want to continue to do some spread stuff, but they want to establish more of a running game, and that's bringing concepts from Hackley and Pleasantville into the fold here. Defensively, they're also returning 6 of 11 starters. So the big question mark to me is up front on both the offensive and defensive side. Now, a couple of kids that Coach has been impressed with. We mentioned Julian Osh already, but Jamison Blakesley and Jason Kim, both wide receivers, both very talented. Jason Kim, I think, was a standout player for them last year in a season that was a bit of a struggle. Jameson Blakesley has a lot of talent. Stud lacrosse player. He's a guy who can also, they can have a really strong duo at that wide receiver spot. A couple other guys on defensively in the defensive front 7. You have, again, Jake Kaplow at the linebacker spot. Big kid, can really thump you when he sizes you up. Ryan Slomsky is another one. Johnny Sala, who kind of is that hybrid defensive back linebacker, is going to be really important. And then Tommy Woolard, he's that one returning offensive lineman who's moving to an offensive tackle spot. Thoughts, Mars, on the first 2?
Yeah, I'm going to talk briefly about Horace Greeley. And knowing Coach Clark, I know that he's making it a mission to bring the program back and make them a powerhouse back in the day since he's been obviously
back in the Triborough days.
Back in the Triborough days, back when he was a player for Horace Greeley. And I think it's really important to understand that he has weapons and he has a kind of a fire, and not just in him, but in his athletes. And I feel like they can sense that, that will kind of push this team forward. Yeah, obviously, Julian Osh, you've already talked quite a bit about in Frank's Finest video, and he's a great athlete. He is dynamic, he can run the ball, throw the ball, he can do it all. But you have a lot of other guys that can really carry the load and really give this offense a lot of different ways to attack. But just like Coach Clark said, a lot of it has to do with defense and really try to slow down these big plays and try to really just slow down the run game. And I feel like that's kind of the big thing that they're going to be looking to do this year, because they have a ability to have a great offensive schemes and score a lot of points. It's just about defense and slowing down these teams from trying to score big, right? If you could just, obviously the simple method, stop them from scoring. You just continue scoring, and you'll be all good, right? That's kind of the idea. But yeah, Horace Greeley should make some noise.
Let's talk about the next two. And the first one up is Walter Panis, coached by Coach Castro. They were 2-5 last year, and again, the year prior they went 8-2. They won the Hudson Valley Football League championship the year prior, but they suffered some injuries and a bunch of adversity last year. Offensively, they are bringing back 5 of 11 starters. Again, 1 out of 5 on the offensive line, so a lot of new faces up front. They also, again, have to replace their quarterback. So Christian Ramos, who was a slot receiver and defensive back last year, moves into the quarterback spot this year. One of their better athletes, so they're going to rely on him to kind of lead the charge here. And coach believed that they had more depth this year, that they can spread the ball out. So the last couple years was the Carlucci show. Coach believes that they can spread the ball out a little bit more this year because Carlucci was tremendous for them. He was the heart and soul of that team. So he looks forward to kind of spreading it around. Defensively, they're also returning 6 of 11 starters. They have to force more turnovers. He wants to be more aggressive. They're trying to change a little bit of philosophy on their pursuit. So that's kind of a big thing. 2 players that stood out. Christian Ramos, I already mentioned. He wants to, this is a kid who wants to go to West Point that coach mentioned. He's a leader on both sides of the ball. I thought he was a really strong safety for them. Making that move to quarterback, he's going to bring that leadership. And Jack Doherty, he's kind of an outside linebacker mixed with a running back and slot wide receiver. Coach really talked about how he has transformed his body, and he's going to be a super reliable player for them. Next up, let's talk about the champs. The Hudson Valley Football League champs from last year is Peekskill. Coached by Coach Gardner. They went 6-3. They won versus Tappan Zee in the championship. Their highest win total, Mars, last year since 2014 in their first title. So a really tremendous moment for them. But they're going to have to replace a bunch of guys. Offensively, 4 out of 11 starters are coming back. Good that they have 2 of them on the offensive line. They do have to replace that quarterback that they're having kind of 3 quarterbacks battling out, 2 sophomores and 1 junior. Christian Preston is someone that is, coach has emphasized as having a really strong offseason. They want to have more explosive plays. At times, the offense showed some explosive plays, and then at times they had really struggled to move the ball consistently. So, probably consistency is going to be a big one. Defensively, though, Mars, this defense was number 2 in points in the Hudson Valley Football League last year, but they have to replace 9 starters. So 2 starters are coming back. So that's going to be obviously a huge question. Some players to watch. Darnell Hinton was a Frank's finest. For me, I really love him on the defensive line. Made a lot of plays for this defense. Going to be huge on the offensive line as well. Kevin Hodge on the offensive line as well. Multiple year starter. Versatile guy, can play on each position up front. Darius Smythe, he's also a running back and linebacker. And Julian Jackson is another one. So keep an eye on those guys for their team. Thoughts, Mars, on the next 2, and then we'll do our final 3.
Yeah, I feel like Peekskill, is a program that I really been watching the last few years, and I've seen them obviously go through a lot of turmoil. They had the brand new stadium facility that looks phenomenal, and obviously culminating in a great season they had last year. Now the question is going to be about, all right, you showed that you can win in the HVFL, but now it's going to be, how do you continue that momentum, maybe become more of a powerhouse in that league? And so it's about replacing those stars, right? What's your scheme? How are you going to continue that momentum? And so this is going to be a good challenge for these athletes, whoever's stepping into these roles, that they need to continue that. They need to show that this is not just a one-time showing. It needs to be a consistency. And I feel like that there's a lot of guys that can show up and bring that momentum or that energy to really change the program, right? Because now you can. That should be something that you should bring motivation to yourself and say, we're not just going to do this for XOs and wins. We're here to change the program for the future, right? And that culminates in a new set of character and just a kind of an idea for the future for Peekskill.
Yeah. Let's talk about the next 3 teams to round it all off. And next one's Port Chester, coached by Coach Halstead. They went 3-5 last year. They lost to Tappan Zee in the semifinals. And offensively, they're returning 6 of their 11 starters, 3 on the offensive line, and their quarterback is returning, who has a lot of high plays in Alexis Morel. Coach really raved about the work that he has put on this offseason. He thinks he can make a major jump, the junior. And he really loves to impose his will. That's the big thing that he emphasized. He has a strong interior on that offensive line. They really want to move people. They run a kind of that option offense, so it's going to be very important, especially internally, to move some bodies. And that was a big emphasis. Defensively, 3 out of 11 starters coming back, and they need to be better. They were last in the league in points allowed last year, so defensively is obviously going to be a big question mark. That experience on defense. But a couple guys to keep an eye on. John Poletti's the number one guy. I mean, that stands out. Third-year starter at the fullback spot. In that offense, you need a fullback who is a downhill runner. He brings that for him. But defensively, he also had, I think, 6 sacks last year at the defensive end spot. I think their most important player. I mentioned Alexis Morale, the work that he has put in, running the football at the quarterback spot, also making some plays in the passing game. But then you have Scott Sullivan, who's a captain of the football and baseball team, a really important skill player for them. Carlos Pelma, Alberto Parage, Xavier Tapia. So, there's a couple kids to keep an eye on for Portchester, who could be one of those kind of sleepers in this league. Next up is Poughkeepsie, coached by Coach Jaquan Floyd. Jaquan Floyd, I didn't want to mess up his name. I appreciate Coach. I got to talk to him for the first time this offseason, so I really appreciate that. Offensively, they're bringing back 5 of 11 starters, 3 on the offensive line. They do have to replace their quarterback, and there's this stalemate battle he talked about over the summer, so I'm interested to see how that came out. Defensively, they're also returning 6 out of 11 starters, so the big thing is penalties. Penalties was a big thing that hurt Poughkeepsie last year. I remember watching them versus Walter Panis, having some big moments that were pulled back because of penalties. And a big question mark, and Coach Floyd really emphasized to me, he wants to bring that enthusiasm back into football for Poughkeepsie. And so that, to me, was a really thing that stood out in my conversation to him. But a couple players to keep an eye on. Henry Gonzalez. Big defensive lineman and offensive lineman for them. He can play right tackle. He can play left tackle. Good size to him. You have Tajiri Gary, who's a 3-sport athlete. They want to move him around all over the place. Wide receiver, slot back. He also is in the back end of that defense who can make plays. You also have Nakai Lloyd, who's going to be kind of that fullback. He can even play on some defensive tackle and linebacker. So Poughkeepsie has a couple players, and also a young player in Isaac Azevedo, who's a sophomore. He's a kind of that cornerback who can also line up as a slot back as well. So a couple players that Poughkeepsie to keep an eye on. And finally, to wrap it all up, probably to me the favorite in the league is Tappan Zee. Coached by Coach Iannucci. They were 7-2. They lost to Peekskill in that Hudson Valley Championship. Most wins they've had in a season since 2013. So really strong year last year. I know ended in disappointment. But this was the number 1 offense in the Hudson Valley Football League last year, Mars, and they're returning 7 starters, 3 on the offensive line, including their quarterback, Tommy Cavalin, who made some big-time plays. He was a big, deep ball thrower. Those step back and launch it. He also did some pretty good job off of play action. So this was a young man who made some big plays. Look for him to take that next step forward. But they're looking to improve the run game, and that's going to include, again, the guys up front. And the number 1 guy to me is Cameron Keeperman, who is an offensive lineman, defensive lineman. He's I believe a wrestler, all-section wrestler. Guy who really knows how to use people's leverage well, and that's how he moves bodies. He's not the biggest guy, but he shows he's strong. He uses his leverage well. He drives his feet, and so he's going to be an important 2-way lineman for them. And then some of those skill guys. You got Jack Piccioni, who made some big-time Moss wide receiver catches on people. He'll catch over people's heads, make some big-time plays. Mike Martinez is another one. Defensively, they're returning 9 starters. Mars led the way by Aiden Tofa, the linebacker, who is super active. Mars, thoughts on the final 3 before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I feel like Tappan Zee is definitely the most dangerous team in the HVFL because they have so many returning players, and they were the consistent best offensive team last year. And I feel like that when you have all these returning players coming back, especially with 3 of the 5 offensive linemen, returning quarterback, you have a consistency, right? And now it's like they should have that. Here's the thing, and no one likes to lose. We all hate losing, but the loss to Peekskill in the championship game should be a driving force for these seniors to say, we need to now culminate in a win, right? And show that all that work you put in, especially from last year to this year, how are you going to capitalize and end your season on that W, right? And I feel like that's something that should drive them, that should push these seniors to want to continue the same trend they did last year, just now finish the job. And I feel like that's why Tappan Zee is very dangerous.
They are. They are. And with that, we are going to be ending the show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching. Good luck to all the players and coaches as the season gets underway. Make sure if you haven't done so yet, hit that thumbs up and subscribe to help support the channel, and consider joining our Patreon for some added benefits. With that, we are signing off. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you all very soon.